today for this special memorial service. I'd like to ask Steve Quillen, the president of the Games, to come up for some words.
Thanks, Ellen. Welcome everyone to a memorial service for a man that was a friend to all of us, to me, to each of you, to all these pipers. And Sandy was a really big deal. He was a big wheel at the Highland Games at Grandfather Mountain for a long time. And we want to celebrate Sandy today. This is intended to be a musical sort of a tribute to Sandy, played by people who were close to him, and tunes that he really held dear. We'll have a couple of speaking parts, but mostly this is going to be a musical tribute to the man that was Sandy Jones, the man that collected all of us and kept all of us. He was a special fellow, and Sandy, I hope you enjoy this. Beautifully done. I've always thought those McLeod sisters must have been pretty something special to get tunes like that. Susan McLeod, that's such a great tune. And I know Sandy loved all that music. He loved Lexi McCaskill. Sandy just loved music. I'd now like to ask Sandy's daughter Kathleen to come up. I asked Kathleen to talk about the piping aspects of Sandy's life. I asked Amelia Prioli, when she comes up, to talk about the family aspects of Sandy's life. And lastly, I asked our Vice President of the Grandfather Mountain Board of Trustees, Sally Warburton, to talk about Sandy and the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. And so that's going to be our program. And Kathleen, I'd like to ask you up, please.
All right. So I was asked to talk about Dad and piping, and that's huge. Dad was born in northern Idaho, and he started piping lessons at the age of 8. He was encouraged by his grandfather, Scotty Cameron, who had emigrated from Scotland. And he studied with George Mars and came up in the pipe band world with the Kimberley Pipe Band in Kimberley, British Columbia, Canada. More than once, Dad tried hitchhiking there, stowed away either in a train or or hitchhiking or on a train running away. But he always got returned back. Eventually, his family moved to Spokane, Washington, but he continued piping with Kimberley Band. And after finishing high school and marrying my mom, Dorcas, they moved back to near Kellogg, Idaho. Jobs were scarce then, and Dad had gotten laid off from both the railroad and the mines, so he joined the Air Force, and he was packed off to San Antonio for basic training. And once he was there, it became known that he was a piper, and he was asked if he'd like to play with the Air Force Pipe Band, and he obviously said sure. And so that he was asked to tell his family to ship his pipes to him, which he did. And once he got done with basic training, he was off to the DC area where the United States Air Force Pipe Band was based. Mom and Dad packed their car, 1950 Chevy, and drove across the country with very little in the car. And Mom said that the radio didn't work very well in the car either, and that sometimes when she was steering, Dad would play drums on the steering wheel, and they would sing. So they set up housekeeping in their new town of Washington, D.C. The United States Air Force Pipe Band was they were musical ambassadors, and Dad he traveled all over the world sharing piping with the Air Force Pipe Band. And while he was with the Air Force Pipe Band, he became a favorite of the then President JFK and of Jackie, and he was a frequent performer at the White House for like state dinners and such. When JFK was assassinated in November of 1963, the band was retreated back to DC from New Orleans, where they had been performing, and advised to remain on standby. And sure enough, Jackie Kennedy requested that the band play at his funeral, and they played at President JFK's funeral at the graveside. In the late 1960s, Agnes McCrae Morton of the Grandfather Games invited the United States Air Force Pipe Band to come to the Grandfather Games, and that began a long relationship with the Games for Dad. Mrs. Morton encouraged Dad to start a piping school in the area around the time that the Games were held. And so in 1970, Dad founded the North American Academy of Piping and Drumming with the late John McFadgen, and it's currently in its 53rd year right now. Alongside of this, alongside of this, Dad was instrumental in creating a vibrant piping scene. He played also with the Washington Scottish Pipe Band, and then he helped to found the Denny and Dunny Bass Pipe Band, which went on to become later the City of Washington Pipe Band. And we always had a steady stream of folks coming to our house for lessons wherever we lived. One time he was giving piping lessons to an Air Force colonel and forgot. Mom says the colonel arrived for his lesson and Dad wasn't there. And so the colonel gave him a big giant calendar so he wouldn't forget his appointments anymore. And to this day, he's got a big old calendar on the desk. He also helped to make a youth pipe band when we lived in the DC and Annapolis area, the Annapolis Pipe Band. It was already in operation, but he elevated it, and I was a member of that band, and so was Vic over there. And it used to be a lot of fun having group piping lessons around the old kitchen table in the basement, and steady stream of folks would come for lessons there too. Dad retired from the Air Force after 20 years, and he went to work at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, and he worked there for 25 years and mentored hundreds of cadets. He greatly elevated the level of playing at that institution, took the band to the Edinburgh Tattoo, and it again demonstrated how well piping flourished whenever he lived in the area. In addition to teaching at the Citadel, he started a new pipe band there, the Charleston Police Pipes and Drums, which is now the Charleston Pipe Band. And again, in Charleston, we had a steady stream of folks that were coming over for lessons. During that time frame, he also authored a tutor book beginning the Highland bagpipes, and it's still selling new copies all the time for many new people who are taking up the pipes. He helped found the EUSPVA, and he became in demand as a respected judge at the Highland Games all over the country. He's conducted lots of workshops with folks over the country, and I've had a lot of people tell me really over the years, not just since he passed away, that they really like playing for my dad in competition because he was always very encouraging and wrote encouraging things on the score sheets. My point for saying all these things is that it shows how much piping flourished wherever he went, and it was his lifelong work. I've always thought and remarked to other people when I would tell them what my dad does that he was a lucky guy to be able to make his living off of what he really loved doing. And my other point is, when you consider all of the people he taught, over 52 years at the piping school, over 25 years at the Citadel, all of the private lessons taught at our kitchen tables in the DC, Annapolis, Charleston, Brevard, and Tennessee homes, through all of his workshops and his tutor books, I think it's safe to say that he has helped teach thousands and thousands of pipers. He's definitely had a big impact on the piping world. He was known for a pretty wicked sense of humor, good storyteller, and he was known for his encouragement, his patience, but he also could convey his disappointment with you with just a little look or a few soft-spoken words, and no one would really wanted to be on that side of him, which I've been on that side before. In 2017, Dad was presented with the Balvenie Medal at Blair Castle, and it's an award for lifetime services to piping. He was the first American-born person to receive that award, and I think it's really obvious that he exemplified lifetime services to piping. And through the multitudes that he taught, through the piping school, he leaves a really huge legacy that we are striving to continue. Thanks.
I'd like to ask Sandy's granddaughter, Amelia, to come up. Amelia and Andrew have recently relocated back to North Carolina, and I hope they're enjoying it there. Are you in Chapel Hill? And so I'd like to ask Amelia to step up and give some remarks about Sandy.
Okay. So my name is Amelia Prioli, and I'm one of Sandy's granddaughters. A lot has been said and will be said about Sandy's contribution to the piping and drumming community, especially as he has been called the grandfather of American piping. So it's certainly apropos of our meeting here today on this great mountain that he was so fond of. Being Sandy's family member is a tall order. Many of us are first introduced as Sandy's grandson, Cameron, or Sandy's daughter, Kathy, versus our unique relationship to whomever was introducing us. What an honor that tall order is. To be adjacent to Sandy was to see how he treated this community as an extension of his family. I love being around my grandfather for so many reasons that I know resonate with everybody here. As a little girl, I was really sensitive to how folks were in his company. They treated it with excitement, and this was no news to me, as he was our super goofy grandfather, playing practical jokes on our parents with us, doing anything for a laugh, and always making sure that we had ice cream after dinner, and as my mom reminded me yesterday, letting us dip our toothbrushes in the evening sherry. When I hit double digits, around 10, 11 years old, I then became acutely aware of how folks treated his company with reverence. For a few years, I didn't actually know how to connect with him because I felt like I needed to share him, and I knew how precious his time was. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that he had a superpower. He always had enough time and enough light and enough warmth for everybody, including me. I was far from being a baby, but I remember when I was probably about 15 years old, and we were at, I think, a games in South Carolina, and he introduced me to someone and said, "This is my grandbaby, Amelia." And it put the silliest grin on my face. And it was the same grin I had when he introduced my husband to someone as his grandson for the first time, and the same grin that came back when he introduced my daughter to some Citadel alum as his great-grandbaby. Family was always a priority for Sandy. He remained married to Dorcas for nearly 65 years. They met when they were kids in the Spokane, Washington area. Sandy was more than occasionally a naughty child, and Dorcas was anything but. In fact, the dedicated crossing guard turned him in after he broke some of her rules, and they were inseparable after that. High school sweethearts, they had 4 children. They endured the loss of their son, and they raised 3 beautiful daughters with love and opportunity, who then did the same with their own families, making Sandy a grandpa and a great Sandy, which was the name he chose for his great-grandchildren. And he truly was that. He was our great Sandy, the greatest man I've ever known, setting an impeccable standard and leading others on the right path with kindness and compassion. Sandy showed up for me and for all of us. He and my grandma opened their home up to me, my mom, and my brother when we needed them the most. And that wasn't his first rodeo, because he protected his siblings when they were all children, and he kept them safe and provided for them from a young age. He protected his daughters by making sure that they were always in stable places and communities with excellent education opportunities, and he created a loving home that we all wanted to return to as often as possible. I don't even have to wonder how his influence and his keen sense of meeting spoken and unspoken needs has protected others over the years. He provided a refuge by creating a safe space to talk. He generated relationships between some of the very best friends by building community for people with similar interests, and helped so many of us forge a connection to our ancestors through the music he taught us. When he passed away, our family received more remembrances in cards, phone calls, and stories than we could count. He believed in extension of family. We heard time and again how Sandy became a part of other families, taking his duties as godfather very seriously, and always providing mentorship or even dedicating a tune in his godchildren's honor. Or how his influence in this particular sphere helped join families entirely like my own. My husband and I met at the piping school when we were kids. And I can think of at least 5 or 6 other families right off the top of my head that, this happened for them too. There are entire new generations of pipers and drummers because of that legacy. We heard from many, especially his students from the Citadel, that he was oftentimes regarded as more of a father to the cadets he worked with than the ones that they had at home. He was a husband, a brother, a father by proxy, and thereby a grandfather to us all. A man of deep integrity, abiding good humor and kindness, and of gentle grace and honor. He will be sorely missed. I'm honored to have the opportunity to have shared his memory with you all today, and may it continue to be the blessing that it always was. Thank you.
Boy, Amelia, that was great. You almost outkicked your coverage there. We're going to ask our pipers back up. Jim, is this is martyrdom from Sandy's book? So Kathleen talked about Sandy's book about beginning piping, and this hymn is one of the selections from that book. And so I'd like to ask Jim and the guys to play it. Thank you. Warburton. Sally goes way back with Sandy and way back with the Grandfather Mountain Highlanders, but she's also currently serving as the Vice President of the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games Board of Trustees, for which I am eternally grateful. And so, Sally, would you come up, please?
I'm so very honored to have been asked to speak to you today. The Grandfather Mountain Highland Games lost our beloved Sandy Jones on March 5th, 2023. It's a loss for all of us here, but such a loss for the Games. Sandy's close association with the Games began 60 years ago, but I watched an interview the other day with Sandy, and he said Agnes O'Kay Morton, everybody called her Ms. M, came to him in 1967 or 1966, and asked him to improve piping. And Sandy's quote was, "She didn't care what I did or how I did it. She just wanted the piping and drumming to improve." In the process of all that, he fell in love with the Games. He loved this Games, and I know everyone here this weekend can see why, and he's missed by all of us. Sandy served the Games in many ways. He was the longtime event director for piping and drumming. It was one of my great honors that he passed that on to me when he was ready to be more involved in the board. He was the longest serving member on the board of directors. And I can remember when he was first put on the board, and this was long before I did anything, I don't know. And I can remember Harvey Rich, of all people, saying, they finally have somebody on the board that knows what Highland Games are about. The folks that started the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games were awesome, and we're so grateful to Agnes McCrae Morton and all the people that worked so hard in the beginning to start the games. But when they brought Sandy on the board, they really knew they had someone who knew so much about everything and could really bring so much wisdom and advice to the games. He served as the 10th president of the Highland Games for 4 years, and he was just amazing. You know, as it's already been said, it was quiet. He was soft-spoken. And the quote that kept coming to me is Theodore Roosevelt's, "Walk or speak softly and carry a big stick." Maybe it was a staff or a crook or a cane. Of course, not literally a stick, but when Sandy spoke, everyone listened. And he might not be as chatty as Steve is, or I am, or some other members on the board, but when Sandy wanted to speak, the room was quiet and everyone listened. He handled every task. When I was first on the board, there would be a discussion about someone who'd done something, and Sandy said, well, or he needed to go, or needed to not be doing what he was doing anymore. And Sandy said, I'll do it. I'll write him. I'll make that phone call. And I thought, wow, how hard it is to make some of those calls when you have to do something awkward, or when someone would write a letter complaining about an experience they had at the games. Sandy always said, I'll do it. I'll call her. I'll talk to her. He was willing to do anything. And as we all know, he did it with kindness and compassion and patience. And really was a remarkable presence on the board of the games. Okay. I mean, I've got all these notes. You know, we all love Sandy. He loved us. I love the quote that was in the program, and I think someone kind of paraphrased it today. He made everyone feel special. He took the time to talk to you. And the quote was, he collected people and valued them. And I just love that. That's very much Sandy. As president, he cemented our relationship with the Grandfather Mountain Stewardship Foundation. Oh, you can't see the mountain right now. It's behind that big tree. Our relationship with the Stewardship Foundation is so very important. And it had been a little shaky. And Sandy just stepped up and met with people and really cemented that. And the relationship now is outstanding, and much of that is due to Sandy. Yep. I'm sorry. I've gotten up a couple of nights. I've gotten out of bed and went and jotted down some notes as I was thinking about this as I was going to bed. John McGowan, who is one of our board members, said today that Sandy asked him to serve on the board, and John McGowan said, I didn't even know he ever noticed me. You know, and you know, he was honored as well to know that Sandy noticed him. I think we all are honored that Sandy noticed us and cared about us. It's already been mentioned that he sent letters and cards, made phone calls to people who were sick or birthdays, just so thoughtful, wrote thank you notes, just the complete package. Okay, so I have a story. I feel like I'm not saying enough, but I think everyone here has got it right here, you know. So in 1981, Robert W. Groves was the president of the games, and they were coming up on their 25th anniversary. So Mr. Groves called Sandy and says, what is an appropriate tune to be played to dedicate our cairn? And if you know, there is a clan cairn down right back in there, and it's dedicated to the clans. I think there are 81 clans on the cairn, and it was dedicated on the 25th anniversary. So Bobby Groves called Sandy and said, what's an appropriate tune to play? And Sandy just happened to be sitting at his desk or sitting at a table and had a music book open to The Cairn on the Hill. That's the name of the tune. It was written by R.U. Brown. I asked some of the guys yesterday if they knew who R.U. Brown was, and they did. From what I can see, he premiered it on vinyl in 1972. Sandy never gave it another thought. Bobby didn't ask him to play the tune. He just wanted to know what tune should be played. So when Sandy gets to the games that day, Bobby comes up and says, you're going to play the tune in a few minutes? And Sandy said, well, what tune? And he said, The Cairn on the Hill. So Sandy left and went to the vendors and was able to find a book that it was published in. And I don't know what book that was. I couldn't find that. But John McKenzie. And so he found the book at a vendor, took the book. I guess he probably looked at it a little bit, but I don't think he had much time. Have you all heard this story? Have you ever heard Sandy tell this story? So he took the book, he put it up in a tree amidst the leaves. Apparently it was kind of windy, and somehow was able to get the book propped up in the tree where no one could see it, and he played The Cairn on the Hill. So I think that's a great story. Sandy meant so much to the games and did so much for the games, and we just can't say enough. I have to say one thing. Toodles.
Thank you, Sally. Pretty clear Sandy was all that in a box of rocks, too. Our next musical selection is a tune that was very important to Sandy. Kathy mentioned earlier that this tune was played for John Kennedy's funeral. It was also played for Winston Churchill's funeral and for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. If you'll play Mist Covered Mountains, please. Thank you. Sandy was never too busy to talk to me when he was president and I was vice president, or when I was president and he had rolled back onto the Board of Trustees. He took every call. He'd call me back. If he called me back, he'd apologize. If he was talking to the president of India, he would call me and apologize because he was on the phone when I tried to talk to him. He was a wonderful mentor to me. Sandy was the 10th president of the Highland Games, and I'm the 11th. This hunk of silver and amethyst that you see on my chest is the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games President's Medal. It was made in 1961 by a fellow in Spruce Pine, North Carolina. The stones, the rough-cut amethysts, came from Agnes McCrae Morton's mother. And so those stones probably go back in Agnes's family for, 1860 or something. Who knows? Anyway, Sandy had the medal, and in 2019, when I was elected president, he was in the hospital with pneumonia. And he couldn't make it to the games. He called and asked that I officiate. And on Sunday, he checked himself out of the hospital, I think over the fairly strenuous objections of one Dorcas Jones and one Kathleen Nixon. But he came up to the games fully kilted. He brought this medal. The picture that's on the program for this year is Sandy's hands with the medal, and he reached up and put that medal around my neck, and then he went back into the hospital. He felt keenly his responsibilities, both the responsibilities to the games, responsibilities to his family, responsibilities to his friends. He did what he said he was going to do, and he was just one of the best men that I've ever known. And I truly appreciate everyone coming out today to share these memories of Sandy and to listen to the beautiful music and just a great celebration of Sandy's life and his connection to the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. We will, above all, miss Sandy Jones. I have reached out 500 times to call him since March 5th, and I still think of him very often and think about conversations that we would have had about things. And Sandy never snuffed my ideas. He would always listen. I would always listen to his ideas, and then he would give me plenty of room to make whatever kind of mistakes I needed to make, I suppose. But he's been a great mentor to me, and I will miss him terribly. Jim, can you hang around a minute? most of you know this fellow, but this is Jim Dillahay, folks. And I want to thank Jim for putting together the musical portion of this program. Jim has taken over the piping school, along with Kathy. And Kathy, if you'd stand up, please. So that's the piping school is incredibly important to the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. We contribute scholarship money every year, and it's just been a great thing. Jim also runs the piping program at the Citadel now, and has for 10 years or so. Time flies when you're having fun. 21 years. But what I wanted to say, last Wednesday, Jim Dillahay was elected unanimously to the Board of Trustees for the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. And Sally already stole it, but what I really wanted to say last was toodles. Toodles.